In the last autumn of the Second World War, Royal Air Force pilots patrolling the skies over occupied Europe began filing reports about an aircraft they simply could not touch. It flew higher than they could climb, faster than they could chase, and it left them staring at empty sky. It carried a camera instead of guns, and it photographed Allied harbors, bridges, and troop concentrations almost at will. It was the fastest thing in the air, the world's first jet bomber, and Germany was convinced it could rewrite the war. Its name was the Arado Ar 234, and its story is a strange one, because nearly everything the propaganda promised about it was true, and almost none of it mattered. To understand the Arado Ar 234, you have to understand the problem Germany faced by the middle of the war. By 1943, the skies over the continent were no longer safe for the Luftwaffe. Allied fighters were everywhere. Allied bomber fleets were growing month by month, and Germany's older reconnaissance aircraft, the machines whose entire job was to fly out, take photographs, and bring back a picture of what the enemy was doing, were being shot down or turned back before they could see anything useful. A reconnaissance plane that cannot survive over enemy territory is worthless. And that is exactly what was happening. At the moment Germany most needed to see what the Allies were preparing, it was going blind. The answer, at least on paper, was speed. If an aircraft could simply fly faster and higher than every fighter sent to intercept it, then it would not need guns or heavy armor or a fighter escort to protect it. It would outrun the whole problem. And by 1943, Germany possessed the one thing that could make that possible: the jet engine. The Arado company had been sketching jet-powered designs since 1941, well before most of the world took the idea seriously, and their concept became the Arado Ar 234. Crucially, it was conceived first and foremost as a spy in the sky, a fast reconnaissance aircraft. Only later was it asked to carry bombs as well. What made it special was, above all, that it was clean, simple, and astonishingly fast. It was a slender aircraft with a single seat and two jet engines slung beneath its wings, and it could reach speeds of around 460 miles per hour, faster than nearly every Allied fighter of its day. For an aircraft whose entire survival strategy was speed, that number was everything. It meant that a plane armed with nothing but a camera could fly straight across the most heavily defended airspace on Earth and come home untouched. The pilot sat in a fully glazed nose, a cockpit made almost entirely of glass panels, which gave him an extraordinary field of view in every direction. For a reconnaissance pilot whose whole job was to see, this was close to ideal. The early prototypes carried one of the strangest features of the entire war. To keep the aircraft as light as possible, the first versions had no conventional landing gear at all. Instead, the plane took off from a wheeled trolley that it dropped away once airborne, and it landed on skids, sliding to a stop on the grass like a toboggan. It was ingenious in theory and a nightmare in practice, because a plane stranded on its belly in the middle of an airfield was helpless and could not be moved quickly out of danger. The production version sensibly abandoned this idea and used ordinary retractable landing gear like any other aircraft. But the truly forward-looking touch was how it delivered its bombs. A single pilot cannot fly a fast jet and carefully aim bombs at the same moment. So the Arado engineers gave the aircraft an autopilot. On its bombing run, the pilot would let the autopilot fly the plane straight and level, then lean forward over a specialized sight to line up the target before releasing his load. It was a genuine glimpse of the future, a preview of how jet bombers would eventually operate, arriving years before anyone else had solved that problem. In almost every respect, the Arado Ar 234 was an aircraft that belonged to the coming decade rather than the one it was born into. In the role it was actually built for, reconnaissance, the Arado Ar 234 was a quiet triumph. Beginning in the summer of 1944, these aircraft flew over Allied positions in liberated France, and later they became the first jet aircraft to fly over Britain itself, bringing back photographs of ports and staging areas that Germany had been unable to obtain for months. Flying high and fast, they were effectively untouchable. Allied fighter pilots could see them, could sometimes even climb close to them, but simply could not stay with them long enough to line up a shot. For a brief window, the blind Luftwaffe could see again, and it saw clearly. As a bomber, however, the record is far more modest, and this is where the legend and the reality begin to part ways. The most famous episode came in March of 1945 at the town of Remagen, where American forces had captured an intact bridge across the Rhine, the last great natural barrier standing between the Allies and the heart of Germany. It was a catastrophe for the German command, and the Luftwaffe threw everything it had at that bridge, including its precious jet bombers. The Arados attacked it again and again, and they failed to bring it down. Hitting a narrow, stationary bridge from a jet moving at hundreds of miles per hour turned out to be brutally difficult, and the aircraft's small numbers meant only a handful could strike at a time. The bridge did eventually collapse, but from the cumulative damage of many different weapons and the strain of heavy traffic, not from a clean jet bomber strike. The world's most advanced bomber could not reliably destroy one bridge. And that gap is the real story of the Arado Ar-234. The myth, encouraged at the time and repeated ever since, is that this was a war-changing wonder weapon, a machine so advanced that it might have altered the course of the conflict if only there had been more of them. The reality is more sobering. Only around 210 of them were ever built. They arrived in the final months of the war, when Germany was already collapsing on every front. And the very engines that made them so fast were also their greatest weakness. Those early jet engines were unreliable and wore out with alarming speed, sometimes lasting only a handful of flying hours before they had to be torn out and replaced. A jet is useless if its engines are worn out, and just as useless if there is no fuel to feed them. By 1945, Germany was desperately short of the specialized fuel these engines needed. Many Arados sat motionless on the ground, not because the enemy destroyed them, but because there was nothing to fly them with, and too few trained pilots left to fly them at all. There is a second, quieter myth worth correcting: the assumption that being first automatically makes something decisive. The Arado Ar-234 was indeed the world's first operational jet bomber, and that is a genuine milestone in the history of aviation. But being first is not the same as being important to the outcome. As a bomber, it carried a modest load, it struck in tiny numbers, and it never came close to affecting the strategic picture of the war, where it genuinely excelled. In reconnaissance, it gathered excellent photographs of an enemy that Germany no longer had the strength to stop, no matter what those photographs revealed. It could see the flood coming. It could not hold it back. Historians who study the aircraft tend to agree on this balance. The Arado Ar-234 was a superb piece of engineering, arguably one of the most elegant and advanced designs of the entire war, and at the very same time an aircraft that changed nothing about how the war ended. Both things are true together, and holding them side by side is the honest way to understand it. It was neither the invincible marvel of legend nor a failure. It was a brilliant tool handed to a nation that had already lost the ability to use it. Its true legacy, then, lives not in what it did, but in what it pointed toward. The Arado Ar-234 proved that a jet aircraft could carry cameras and bombs, cross defended airspace at will, and return home. And it did so with features: the glazed cockpit, the autopilot bombing run, the clean twin-engine layout that would become utterly standard in the jet bombers of the decades that followed. When the Allies captured surviving examples at the end of the war, they studied them closely, as they studied so much of Germany's late-war jet technology, and the lessons they took away quietly fed into the aircraft of the emerging jet age. The machine itself was a dead end, produced in pitiful numbers by a doomed regime in its final year. But the ideas inside it flew on for generations. And in the end, that is the truth of the Arado Ar-234. It was not the wonder weapon its makers imagined, and it did not save anyone. It was a brilliant answer that arrived far too late, built by a country that had already run out of fuel, time, and options. Behind its sleek glass nose sat young pilots flying an untested technology over a collapsing homeland, sent to hold back an outcome that no single aircraft could ever change. The Arado Ar-234 is remembered as a first, and it has earned that. But its deeper lesson is older and sadder than any milestone. No machine, however far ahead of its time, can win a war that is already lost.